Welcome, everybody. I haven't done one of these evening interviews in a while because a lot of you know I'm a super duper morning person. But I know that there's a lot of people who cannot join during the day. And so I'm really happy when occasionally we can do one of these evening interviews. And I try to save them for special people like Chad Sell, who's with us tonight. Chad is the author of the Cardboard Kingdom series and the Switcheroo, wait, Stupendous Switcheroo,
Yeah,
right?
that just came out in September. Yeah.
Yes. And then Doodleville.
Mhm.
And I actually read The Cardboard Kingdom last year, Chad, with my son, who is
Oh,
9 years old. So he's kind of like the exact target audience, and he totally, totally loved it.
oh, good.
So
Good.
yay. Yeah, I was really excited that you're able to come and talk to us. So one of the reasons why I'm trying to remember, I think it might have been Brigitte who introduced us. Was it Brigitte?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Um, when she suggested that maybe you would be a good speaker, I was super excited because of the collaborative aspect to the Cardboard Kingdom. So I'm hoping that that can be part of the focus of our conversation tonight.
Yeah.
But I thought we'll just start, maybe, Chad, by you telling us whatever you want to tell us about your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Well, gosh, I've loved comics since I was a little kid. I was a huge superhero fanboy. And then I sort of fell in and out of love over time. Wow, now I'm seeing myself talk. That's weird. Um, I yeah, like I said, I sort of fell in and out of love with comics throughout high school and throughout college. I flirted with a lot of other forms like filmmaking and photo and stuff like that. But I kind of got like super disillusioned in all those industries, and I just wanted to make stuff, and I felt like since I could draw and write, that would be the way to do it. But for whatever reason, for better or worse, I feel like I left college feeling like indestructible and invincible. And I literally thought I would have a book deal within 6 months and be making a living as an author because I just assumed all authors make a great living as an author. So it was like a long, long road of humbling lessons, realizing just how tricky the industry can be, how slow it can be, and how long it can take to build the skill set you need to be a good storyteller. Um, and I I had a brief foray with my like illustration career where my drawings of drag queens went viral, and I became a full-time drag queen illustrator for many years, and that really helped me um, build in a lot of flexibility to my schedule so I could um, pursue developing graphic novel projects without worrying about them being immediately successful or making money because I was making money in a different flexible way. Um, and eventually my first book that finally got sold and published was The Cardboard Kingdom. And the key element with that was the collaborative nature of it. I um and I'm sure a lot of you folks struggle working on something by yourself. I I'm like my own worst critic, and over the many years of work that it takes to do any book, I can really puncture holes in my own confidence about a piece. I have a hard time sometimes telling when something is ready to move forward with, rather than just daydream about. And so I really struggled. I had tried selling many books before Cardboard Kingdom, and they did not sell. I had been with my agent for many, many years throughout all those ordeals, and I had this. Well, I mean, should I just get into Cardboard Kingdom and stuff? I mean, yeah. Um,
Sorry, I muted myself, but I
oh,
said,
no
yeah,
problem.
yeah, sure.
Um, the okay, so I'd been looking around at how to collaborate because I was sick of working by myself and with myself. And so I was just kind of like playing around with ideas of what else can I do? How could I work with other people? I had done I think I'm stronger as an artist than a writer. And that's um so early on, I was approached to draw some other people's stories. And I really hated that. I'm such a little bossy, opinionated person. I hate someone giving me a script and I just have to kind of mindlessly like recreate what they want me to make, even if I don't agree with everything and think things are more confusing than they have to be. The few times I had to do that, I really didn't enjoy it. And so I was trying to think of how can I collaborate with someone that doesn't involve the artist being subservient to the writer. And I was living in Chicago at the time, and I had a good friend, Jay Fuller, and he was doing a really wonderful kids queer webcomic at that time, the boy in pink earmuffs. And I thought, oh, why don't we just try doing a little mini comic together that we would self-publish? And that little mini comic, I wish I had it in my hands, but I don't, was called The Sorceress Next Door. And it basically was the first chapter of the Cardboard Kingdom. It was about a little boy who dresses up like a fantastic sorceress and plays make-believe in his backyard. And we had a lot of fun making it. We worked on the story together, and I did all the art. And we self-published it, and I sold it at conventions for a number of years. And I had this idea of like, well, what about all the other kids in this neighborhood? Like, what are their stories? Who are they? And I thought that there was a book idea there, but I just wasn't sure how to make it happen. And by about 2015, that was like when Kickstarter and crowdsourcing and crowdfunding were really taking off in really highly visible ways. In comics, I was seeing people coming together to do all kinds of like cool themed anthologies around different topics that mainstream publishers typically wouldn't take on. And that just got me thinking of like, well, in comics, writers often have a hard time finding an artist to draw their story. And I thought maybe I can use that. Maybe I made a website where I showed off the story that Jay and I did as sort of a prototype story. And I described my vision for the Cardboard Kingdom. I even laid out kind of my rough terms of how I imagined splitting up royalties and how the process would work. And I laid out very clearly, I tried to set expectations that we may never make any money at this project, but all I can guarantee you is that if I pick your story for the book, then I will draw it and we'll put it out in some way or another. And for a few months, I allowed anyone to send in submissions for the story ideas for characters that would be in the Cardboard Kingdom. And it felt like everything went right with that first book. Like the ideas coming in were so exciting. I had follow-up calls with people after they sent in their submissions to see, what they would be open to changing or, how what they would be like to work with. And that's how I picked the 10 people that I ended up making the book with. And for most of us, it was our first book. There's so much waiting in the long drawn out process of doing a graphic novel. And there's so many weird things that come up that you have no perspective on or background with. And it was really nice going through all that with a group of 10 people to kind of cheer each other on. And all the insecurity and doubt I would often feel about work that I was doing entirely by myself was gone working on Cardboard Kingdom, because I picked every story in the book because I thought it was really great. And I had a clear vision for how to make it happen on the comic page. So it felt really charmed and magical. And, it took a few years of work to come out, and it came out and got all these starred reviews and stuff. And it was thrilling, So that's my whole saga up through 2018.
Wow, you said so many cool things that I don't even know where to start. I guess I'm really curious about the website part, but before we talk about that, I wanted to ask you about, to me, it seems like you are very self-aware. You said that you feel like you're a better artist than you are a writer, and then you realized that you work well with collaborating with other people, but in a certain context, like not in, you said you don't like being subservient to the writer. Is that self-awareness something that developed over time? Or do you feel like you've always kind of been that way?
I think it was a long evolution. Cardboard Kingdom came out when I was turned 35. So I had been trying and failing with many comics projects in many different configurations for many years. And I had tried a lot of different things and figured out what does and doesn't work for me. And with Cardboard Kingdom, I was basically, even though there hadn't, even though I was never aware of any comic being made in the way that Cardboard Kingdom was made, I really just tried to imagine the perfect working situation for me and tried to will it into existence by being open and thoughtful, trying to imagine everything that could go wrong, trying to lay it all out so that there were no surprises and everyone. A key thing for me was laying out my ideal vision and then having people opt into it and send in their story idea. I would feel so much more sheepish about cold emailing random writers and being like, please work with me under these conditions. Like that's just not the way my brain works. I feel so awkward about reaching out and asking anything of anyone. And so having like the website that laid out everything and having people either submit a story or not, based on whether they liked it or not, I think was a key way of reaching out to people and making sure they're on board.
Wow, that is so cool. Does that website still exist?
No, I think I might have taken like screen caps of it and stuff. Yeah, I had like an old like WordPress website years and years ago, but it kept getting hacked. So I eventually just went over to Squarespace. So I think all that stuff is long gone. But
did you ever write any article about it, about the process?
we did some like group interviews and stuff. I think I do link to on my website.
Okay.
It's interesting.
And then I'm also curious, well, once you compiled the pitch, so did all of the writers that you worked with have agents, or because you said a lot of that was their first time, most of them, right?
Yeah, at that time, I don't think anyone else had an agent, and I think that's the only way that the book worked. I I don't know. There are a lot of things like I felt like everything went right with the book one, and the other books have been harder because we never imagined it being a series. But I did not tell my agent about Cardboard Kingdom until it was well underway. It was probably a bad choice, and I've apologized to my agent over and over again for how complicated it made his life. But I was so confident creatively in this project working, and I was worried that my agent would get stuck on all the contractual complicated stuff that would strangle the creativity and keep us from being able to like be open and make something together. Once we were quite far underway, I brought him on board, and he's the one who helped like formalize the collaborator agreements and everything, based on all the terms that I had laid out. But it was, I think the fact that I laid out all my terms at the start, and then we kept them all. Like I don't think I surprised anyone once I sent them like the legal contract. Like we were all excited about it. And I don't, if they had agents, I bet their agents probably would have been like, why would you sign up for this weird project? Here's what's wrong with it. Don't do it. It does get pretty tricky.
Right. So I don't, you can tell me if you don't want to get into these weeds this much, but is the agreement for the book between you and the publisher, and then the collaborators have an agreement with you?
Yeah. I mean, we agreed on how everything would be split up, how copyright would be shared, and then that I would be the one with my agent negotiating a publishing deal for the overall, because we knew that no publisher would want to be negotiating with 10 different people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So and I didn't get any pushback about that.
Yeah. Okay, and then when you went out on submission with the project, did you have a lot of publishers interested?
Um, a few, yeah, I had a few phone calls.
Mhm.
I think, I mean, I can't tell you how incredible it was to like get an offer. Like, because I had gone through the submission process 2 or 3 times before that of just rejection, rejection, rejection,
Mhm.
where I developed like a panic response whenever I would see my agents and an email from my agent in my inbox because I just was so associating him with forwarded rejection letters from publishers. Like it was really tough. And so to like get an offer was like incredible. And I think we got 2 or 3 offers. Um, and um, so that was thrilling and amazing. But it was confusing too, because when you are a comics reader, a lot of these imprints make no sense. Like the imprint we published with was Knopf Books for Young Readers. And if you, as a person who likes to read books, wants to look up, oh, well, what books does Knopf Books for Young Readers specifically put out? It's really, really hard to figure that out because it's all lumped under the Random House Children's Book umbrella. And there is no Knopf Books for Young Readers website where they just have a list of the books they've made, as far as I know back then.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's more about having a phone call with the editor and getting a sense of what they're interested in how much they want
Mhm.
to change your book, and getting a sense with your agent about like where does this imprint fit into the grand scheme of things.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, got it. And so once the book was finished, the first one, and you and your publisher were anticipating, the publication date, were there signs like the book is going to be really successful, or was it a like out of the gate, like, wow, it's doing so well, or was it like a slow build?
Um, I mean, it was my first book, so I didn't really have anything else to compare it to. Like we were all excited about it regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, every single trade review we got was a starred review. I think it was
Oh.
5-star reviews. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was like really like people were freaking out and I was like, is this a big deal? And now like since and but eventually I was like, oh, this is probably the most like acclaimed book I'll ever make in my life. And I and I was right. And that is tricky. But it felt really just like I said, charmed and serendipitous and amazing. Um, uh, and then it got onto a lot of like state reading lists. It got on the Texas Bluebonnet reading list,
Mhm.
which is like a huge deal. So I went and
Mhm.
spent like a week in Texas, or 10 days in Texas, and um, so it was just such an exciting first year having the book out because opportunities and trips and events that I never even knew existed, I was invited to meet with librarians and do classroom visits and stuff like that, like all over. And it took all sorts of forms, like making cardboard stuff with kids and seeing, amazing stuff that kids made and having kids show up in cardboard costumes to the events, that like I said, it was like the very best year of my career, and everything since then has been so much harder.
Well, it would be fun to hear a little bit about the hard stuff. But before we talk about that, I would love to hear a little bit about your creative process because your art is really distinctive, and you know, you definitely have the kind of style where clearly, if I saw it anywhere, I'd be like, oh, Chad Sell made that. So, would you be willing to show a little bit about how you do your
Oh, share my screen and stuff.
creations? Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know of the folks on the call how many of you are artists and how much you do digitally and stuff like that.
I think
Um,
a lot of the people on this call are artists. Yes.
yeah, cool. Um, so yeah, I do everything in Clip Studio, and you know, I'm guessing most of you folks who use Clip Studio take advantage of the multi-page, aspect of it, where you can see the whole dang book. And um, I I am a huge fan, an advocate and champion for a readable rough draft of your book. This is an example of my readable rough draft page from Cardboard Kingdom Book 3 that just came out a week or two ago. When I am working with other writers, I typically tell them, don't divvy up your script into panels and stuff. Maybe don't even divvy it up into pages. Let me do that. I have such strong feelings about how to tell a story visually that I just prefer that you share the story with me. I look through it and kind of mentally, informally divvy it up into like, how many pages is this? Is this too long? Is this too short? Like, let me work the visual storytelling out in that way. Since I'm the one who like obsesses over the language of comics, and I'll be drawing it, you know. So that's a little bit unusual. I think typically when you're writing for someone else to draw, it's expected that you do the panel breakdowns. But you know, I was upfront with my team. I said, you know, don't do panels, don't make your dialogue too wordy, and I don't like drawing complicated buildings or cars, so don't put too many of those in your story. And you know, for me, I want to like get it on the page as soon as possible. So I think, so this is like the readable rough draft. And I sold Cardboard Kingdom 1 with a full readable rough draft of the entire book and like 80 finished pages because we had been working on it for a while. And I just really wanted to sell someone on the power of the stories, not just on what they think the stories might look like based on an outline. And so, you know, this is the rough page, and then this is the final page. And in a lot of cases, I think my favorite part of working on a book is the readable rough draft, because so much of the visual storytelling is figured out. I'm not worried about fine details. I'm purely worried about legibility. Like, will this be readable to someone else? Is it selling the full emotional scope of what I'm doing? And including the lettering, so that it's like, you have a full reading experience. And it's such like, this is the meat and potatoes of the creative process. And doing the final art involves lots of fun colors and details and stuff, but I don't know that it actually adds all that much to the actual storytelling. It certainly increases its commercial appeal, but as long as I have like a really solid readable rough draft, I feel really confident in the book as a whole, and I know that I can execute the actual comic art. And like, in a week or two, I'm going to start the readable rough draft for a new book, and I'm really excited about that because I'll just be like completely absorbed and engaged in that. And then if I make it to the end of that book and like the readable rough draft, then I'll feel so much more comfortable and confident in it being a viable project. When it's still just a script or an outline, I have no idea if it's actually going to work as a comic. Does that make sense? Do you or anyone else have any questions specifically about anything in terms of the art or how it all works, or otherwise I can.
I would love to ask everybody here, do you guys have any technical art questions?
I do, if
Sure,
that's
go ahead.
okay. Yeah, so I also use Clip Studio, and I've been reading a ton online about like RGB versus CMYK. And so do you color these, and do you try to start in CMYK to like save yourself any surprises later on converting it, or do you start in RGB?
As far as I know, Clip Studio does not do CMYK. So that makes the choice easy. You just do RGB, and
Right.
and then you convert it to CMYK at the end, or you upload RGB files to your art director and hope that they convert it to CMYK and it looks as good. It can be a very tricky thing. I had a lot of experience with that in my days doing drag queen prints, because at that point, a lot of my income was in printing prints of my art myself and shipping it out through my Etsy store. And you know, when you do digital prints, that's in CMYK. So I had a lot of experience of taking a really bright, vivid illustration and converting it to CMYK and seeing all those pretty colors look a lot grayer than I expected. And so I just learned what problem colors there are in RGB that just don't convert to CMYK. So I wonder if I can make my palette bigger. Okay, so it's especially the very brightest, like pinks, like sky blues, ultra like aquamarine, and like bright greens that like you should just kind of stay away from in RGB because they just won't convert to CMYK properly. And it's a certain amount of trial and error. I found in just my color graphic novels that when my art director did the conversion from RGB to CMYK, I wasn't as happy with the color quality as I was from the files that I had Clip Studio export and convert to CMYK itself. For whatever reason, I don't know any of the technical jargon of color profiles and exactly how it all works, but I just, from a few different projects, seeing a few different samples, I was like, oh, it just looks better when I export a CMYK, so let's just do that. And yeah, so I hope that was somewhat helpful. So that is one of the big criticisms of Clip Studio, that it doesn't do CMYK. And of course, that is how you actually print full color. So it would be great if they changed that, but that's what I've learned along the way as of now with it just being stuck in RGB.
Thanks very much.
Sure, you can get like so dry and technical and like so granular about this stuff. But I'm sure, especially if you're like early on in your career, it's hard to know what to focus on and what is an easy thing that's solved later and what's like a foundational thing you have to figure out at the start, so it's totally fair to ask about that kind of thing.
Anybody else have a process question or storytelling question? Comments?
I have a question. So I know that a lot of graphic novel editors, they don't really like to have everything finished basically in front of them. So how has your experience been submitting a readable rough or something like that? Because I find myself really wanting to do that, but I don't want to have to change 20 pages or, just rearrange everything because they want to change an element or they think of something better. How have you found that process?
I mean, that's the point of a readable rough draft. That's why it's still rough. That I think if you're presenting a readable rough draft to an editor, you have to be okay changing things. And that's just part of the process. I think I just got used to it early on in my comic attempts where I drew so many hundreds of pages of final art that I have in boxes still. Like oftentimes many different versions of the same story. And so I got a little bit less precious about, oh, I drew this scene once, I'm never going to draw it again. It wasn't a luxury I had because I wanted to make it the best it could be. So yeah, I think that if you're going to do a readable draft, you should only do it if you're okay changing things around a lot and scrapping whole pages if necessary. I find that a lot of times I have gotten very creative about reusing art, like just like coming up with how to change a scene without having to draw every single panel. Like maybe only redrawing a panel or 2.5 panels on a page, but for the most part, a lot of it is the same. So it is tricky. The readable rough drafts, the pace I work at, I often would do 5 to 8 pages of a readable rough draft story a day. And so you just don't feel very precious about it. But it can be tough. Like you can definitely get invested in certain sequences and certain ways that you drew things. And sometimes with the final art, you'll struggle to capture that same life and motion that the rough draft had. Like that's a very common thing that cartoonists deal with their final art, capturing the intensity and expressivity of the sketch.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't ever gotten pushback from an editor about, oh, this is too far along, you know. I really pride myself on typically sharing like pretty polished pitch packages, to the point where my agent might say, you don't need all of this to sell a book. And I'm like, but no, like with Cardboard Kingdom specifically, my concern about selling it based on some finished pages and an outline was I had been working with all of these 10 writers for like 2 years by that point. I was deeply invested in all their stories. And my concern about selling Cardboard Kingdom on a few pages and an outline was that an editor would be like, you know, actually, let's cut this story and that story. And to them, that just seems like a rational like process of editing. But to me, that would mean like cutting a creator or two from the book. And I just wasn't willing to do that. And so I felt like by doing the fully fleshed out rough drafts of each story, it allowed each story to really show what it could do rather than being a picture in the editor's head based on an outline. I also just hate outlines. I feel like outlines never do justice to my books. Only recently have I had any pleasure writing outlines, because I've like tried to make them like more fun for me to write and to read. But for years and years and years, I found synopses and outlines miserable to write. And I just felt like there's no way to capture what I want this book to do in written form, because that defies the whole point of making it a graphic novel.
No, I feel the same way. I'm having a real struggle just writing a real outline or synopsis, and I'm like, can't I just show you?
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, it's a balance, but knowing how you do it, like it makes it feel more okay. I don't know. Like
well, and I think when you do need to work on an outline, I think you should try to make it fun and really ignore the unnecessary details. Like don't get bogged down in character names and just how every little piece of the plot works together, unless the editor really wants that. And just focus on as if you were telling a friend your idea for the book, you know, like really like those broad, big conceptual sweeps about why they should care about your book. Like wait until you hear this, like, you know, like the excitement about like the plot twists and the character developments should be conveyed in the outline. I think I took a much drier approach when I was first doing outlines, where where it was like, I must summarize every aspect of the book and how it all fits together. And that's just not, yeah, I don't know. Reading that kind of outline is miserable for everyone involved. And so is writing it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen just because, yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy to go back to Good Studio if needed.
I have to say, Chad, I love how you were saying the difference between writing an outline that you think somebody that you should write because somebody wants it, versus just telling your story to a friend. I do find that the synopses that I read that I enjoy reading the most usually have a lot of personality. Like the person, you can tell, oh, this person wrote this and they're just having fun. They're just telling it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you must read a lot of synopses and it must be tough. especially working with graphic novelists who are not necessarily writers. Like, yeah. I saw someone ask, I have a hard time keeping up with the chat, but I did see someone ask about whether I ink all the pages first and then color, or do I complete each page as I go? And I ink and color in the same day. It's really an unusual part of the process. A lot of people like do all the pencils for the entire book, and then do all the inks for the book, and then do all the colors or lettering for the book. And in just the few smaller projects that I did that way early on, I found it sucked. I found I just hated whole swaths of that process. Like if you're spending a month or two or however long you spend just like coloring the book, I just think that's so awful and tedious, and it's like not the fun part of making a book, and you just like hate the process. And so I you know, when I'm doing a book like Cardboard Kingdom, I typically do like from the rough readable draft, which does have a lot of the art already figured out. I do two, like based on that, I do 2 pages of final art a day, typically. And it's just really nice to finish a day with some finished pages, you know, and it kind of, by having a day have some penciling, some inking, some lettering, and some coloring, it's like a mix of all the stuff without too much of any one thing. And just the sense of accomplishment of like, and I love sort of figuring out my pace with a project where it's like, oh, I can comfortably do 2 pages a day with Cardboard Kingdom. And if it's a 300-page book, then that means 150 work days. And so then you can like look on your calendar and really give editorial or your agent a really clear idea of like when you can realistically expect to have that book done, you know, building in some time for vacation and just for other stuff to come up. You have a clear idea of how long it takes you. Whereas if you're like leaving coloring for the end, you might not have as much time as you thought you needed and just be an absolute hell trying to finish everything. And in that real burnout cramming period, that just is not sustainable as an artist.
It looks like we have questions from Janice. I think I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi, Janna. Hi, Chad.
Hi.
Yes, you pronounced it right. Thank you. So you answered the question about how long it takes you to, you know, create it 2 pages a day. My other question is, do you use beta readers at all before you submit?
Yeah, but it's hard. It's really hard to find the right people who give the right kind of feedback that you want. Some people can be too tough. Some people can be too nice. Some people get like hung up on like logical consistencies, whereas others, you know, are kind of more about like, well, what conceptually do you want to be doing with this project? You know, with something like Cardboard Kingdom, I had a team of 10 writers to bounce ideas off of. And I saw someone ask like how much of the art did the collaboration did the writers see before publication? So yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention about the readable rough draft in all of my evangelizing about it is that if you're working with collaborators, that readable rough draft is essential to share with them early on and make sure like, are you okay with how this looks? In the process of doing the readable rough draft for Cardboard Kingdom, I would often like shorten lines or just slightly tweak things. And by just making sure that they were all on board with how everything looked and adjusting anything that didn't work, made it so that we were all really happy with the final art by the time it was done.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
But beta readers, finding the right beta readers is like a lifelong process. It's tough. Yeah. And like the real question is, at what point do I show any book to my husband? Lately it often isn't until like I have an ARC, the advanced reader copy, where it's like finally like bound and in physical form. And then he'll like sneak off with it and like be chuckling as he reads it. And then I can like ask him what he liked about it at dinner.
That's really funny. My sister is a novelist, and she was working on this one novel for 8 years before she showed me a single word of what she was writing. I think she just didn't want, even though like I feel like I'm your sister.
It's really tough. And I think when you're working on something entirely by yourself, it is entirely your own. It's your own imaginary playground where you can be thrilled and excited about it. And it's its perfect little like angel self. And it's only when you show it to other people that you have to worry about like, oh no, did I do this right? Is this awful? Am I a complete idiot for spending so much time doing that? Like I had that experience this summer where I had some time in between books. And so I just was like in my brainstorming phase and doing so much character art and just figuring stuff out. And it was just this beautiful, idyllic wonderland. And then I had to show it to some people like my agent. And then shit got real. Like, and then I was like, oh no, I have to answer questions about it. I have to like defend my book. And it really threw me for a loop. And I'm still like reeling from and trying to regain my footing. So it's tough. It's a fragile, vulnerable process, like showing your work to anyone. And I think it's totally fair to be clear about what kind of feedback you want. I think it is completely fair to ask a friend to read your book and tell you and to only tell you what they love about it. Like, I need a cheerleader right now. Will you be my cheerleader? And just to be upfront about that. Or I'm looking for big picture feedback, or I'm really looking for, like, I'm writing a murder mystery and I want you to pick out all the plot holes and inconsistencies because I am trying to work through that. I think it's great to be upfront about that. Because if you're asked for feedback, it can be really uncomfortable and you should also, if someone asks you for feedback, you should ask what kind of feedback they want. You know, do you want good and bad? Do you want good, mostly good? Do you want me to address specific things that you're not sure about, you know? And you want me to ignore the art because it's still rough and you don't want me nitpicking. So, yeah.
All right, Samantha, you had a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah, here, let me scroll up because my brain doesn't stop. Okay, yeah, oh, so working with the collaboration of writers, I was wondering, how involved are they in the art process? Like, do you show them their character designs and settings and things like that, like during the process? And if so, like, do you find they're easy to work with? Like, if they have tweaks and things, like, what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, I would show early character designs to them, build off of their thoughts, and then share the early rough drafts of the book with them, and then the color art and everything. So it was really fun. I don't really remember any like any problems, you know, like it just felt really good natured, and we were all just really open to the feedback. And so yeah, I felt like being an open book and really communicative so that there weren't any like unpleasant surprises, you know. And it's cool to, you know, every writer I've ever worked with loves seeing character designs, you know. My friend Mary Wynn, who I worked on the Switcheroo series with, like, she would tell me just how much she loved me sending my wild superhero and supervillain character designs to her because we had such a blast. Like, she would throw crazy ideas at me, like a villain who's a living vacuum, and I would have to figure out what the hell does Mr. Sucko look like. And we just had such a blast, and it became some of the most fun we had working on the book. So I think that character design brainstorming process is like one of the best parts about collaboration, because it's like all the possibility and none of the like responsibility or actual follow through yet, you know.
Well, maybe that's a good segue into you telling us what you're working on right now.
Well, so I just finished book 3 of the Stupendous Switcheroo. We're hoping books 2 and 3 should both be out next year. And then, you know, I've done, so my 5th and 6th books came out this fall. 7th and 8th Switcheroo will come out next year. And I'm hoping to pivot a little bit. I'm hoping to do some YA books that are a little bit like romantic. I've never done like anything like romantic with my books before, but like I'm interested in some like queer YA books that are kind of like magical realist fantasy. And there's also an autobio memoir book that I've been working on literally for 15 years, on and off, that I'm hoping to finally publish. So yeah, it's a time of like exploration and playing around with whole new tools and skills and styles. It's yeah. So yeah, Cardboard Kingdom 3 just came out in November this month, and I'm considering that the end of that trilogy for now. I leave the book definitely open for future volumes, but like the process of making Cardboard Kingdom book 1 was like so miraculous and amazing, but we never expected it to be a series, and so figuring out how to keep that going book to book has been really tricky. And I'm really proud of the the actual stories, but man, it gets really tough if people have to leave, if I want to bring in new people. So yeah.
Mhm. So actually, I haven't read The Stupendous Switcheroo yet. Can you tell us what the story is?
Yeah, so that was also a switcheroo for me because it is not a graphic novel exactly. It is a hybrid book. So it is prose with illustrations and spot color and stuff. And it's came out of I have always loved superheroes, but we live in such a saturated superhero world where like if you want to create your own superhero, how do you compete with Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, all these like incredibly iconic corporate IP characters? And so one day I was like on a walk and I was thinking, well, like what would be new and different about a new superhero character that would be really fun and get my imagination going. And I had this idea for a little kid who wakes up every day with a different superpower. And so much of my joy of enjoyment of superhero stories is like that process of learning how to use your power. And I especially love like quirky, weird powers, and you have to figure out creative ways to be at all useful. And so I talked about this idea with my friend Mary Wynn back in Chicago. We just lived a few blocks from each other. We were both debut novelists the same year, and we'd go on these long walks together. And I just told her that idea one day. And speaking of like good beta readers and people who respond really well to your early ideas, she just was always so enthusiastic and encouraging when I would just sort of like brainstorm my early book ideas. And she just had such a great response to it. And I liked her writing so much and I knew that I wanted it to be the hybrid book format, but I also wasn't sure if I could actually do all the writing myself because it was just something I had done before. So I asked her if she would want to play around with it with me as like a sort of a side project, and it became this whole series that we did a 3-book deal for. So we'll see how that goes, and if we have a switcheroo universe someday.
Bonnie asked in the chat if you could explain more about what makes a book a hybrid.
So yeah, I think that they use that term. You might also see it called like an illustrated chapter book, but the fact that it has like prose and comics and graphic novels, so that's what makes it a hybrid. That it's a hybrid chapter book, graphic novel, and it's a black and white with one spot color, like that bright blue green. So doing that format was actually way more complicated than I thought it would be. It was really tricky. Just like getting the words and images to fit together. So if any of you are interested in doing that, you really want to like figure your stuff out. And before you get too far into the project, like really have a head-to-head with like an art director or someone who works at whatever publisher you're working with, if you're going to be working with a publisher, and figure out how will this work. Because it like, after doing all these full color graphic novels, I thought I had it all under my bag. And then the 2-color printing and the hybrid format introduced so many more logistical complications than I ever imagined. So that's one of the cases where things get really tricky, that the interaction of words and image.
Can you give some examples specifically of like why it was so tricky?
Well, because when you're doing a full color graphic novel and you're lettering it yourself, you have full control over what's on the page. Like the art director is not going to impose any new elements onto the page to mess things up. But if you're doing a hybrid prose and illustration book, Mary Wynn, my collaborator, would do the text manuscript, send it off, it would get copy edited, it would get edited, and then the art director lays it out onto the page according to how she thinks it should be. Mary Wynn would break it down page by page. But they would just be like, doing, but then there'd be a lot of back and forth of like Mary Wynn would be like, oh, actually that paragraph should be above that illustration, not below it, or we need more room here. And then I would get sent like a PDF of the layouts with just the text. And then I would import it all into Clip Studio, which you can do. You can import a PDF into Clip Studio as like a full multi-page document and then draw right on it. And that's essentially what I did. But then anytime there were text changes, I had to adjust that, and it got so finicky, you know. So the fact that it had to incorporate my art with text that Mary Wynn had written, but that an art director had to lay out, meant that like whenever Mary Wynn made an adjustment, the art director would have to implement it, and I would have to make sure it was reflected in the art. So it's just a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah. All right. Does anybody else have any last questions for Chad?
Any like general advice you wish you could like go back and tell yourself earlier in your career that would have been helpful?
My first few projects that I worked on, I worked on one project for a few years, like redoing it and redoing it and redoing it. Like I thought, like I kept learning and developing, and then incorporating all my new skills on like a new draft of the book. But then by the end of it, I had hundreds of pages and nothing really to show for it. Like I didn't have any final product. And to some extent, I almost wish I had like done a few web comics that might have been messy, might not have made sense, might not have been very good. But over the course of that, I might have developed an audience. I might have had something to show for it, and I learned along the way. So that's sort of what I wish I had done a little bit differently. But also, you know, to develop that self-awareness about what do I feel good about, what are my favorite parts of a book. If I'm working on something, what do I kind of dread doing? And if I dread doing it, does that mean that I have to get better at it? Or does that mean I should try to figure out how not to have to do it? You know, in the sense of like, oh, if you just hate color, then maybe you should just use a colorist. Or if you hate lettering, maybe you should find a letterer. Or if you hate drawing buildings, then maybe do like a Stone Age fantasy, you know. So yeah, it's tough, you know. I think you should figure out. I suggest always trying to work toward making the books you want to make, not what books you think will sell. Because you might think you have a hot commercial property in your hands, but it might flop. And life is short, and you might as well work on your passion projects that you love and like are desperate to have out in the world, you know. As long as there's any semblance of an audience behind it.
Great question, Emily, to kind of wrap things up. So Chad, I put the links in the chat to your Penguin Random House page that has all of your books, and also your website. Do you have a newsletter or anything like that? Or how do you suggest if people want to keep up with you?
I don't have a newsletter. I should. But on most social media, I'm ChadSell01, Instagram, X, Facebook. I don't know. You can find me on Facebook. But I'm not super online in general. I kind of wish I was, but I can't.
You know, I meant to ask you about that. Do you mind if we spend another couple minutes?
That's fine. Yeah.
Because one of the things I remember reading, I was reading one of the interviews that you did with your collaborators. I think it was on Electric Lit.
Yeah.
About how you initially put the word out on social media to get people interested in the project and possibly submitting stories. So, and then when I did quickly look at your social media accounts, and to me, it seems like, as an outsider who hasn't been following your social media every day or anything, you seem great. You look like you're active. So, have you gone through like ebbs and flows in how you use social media? Do you have strong feelings now about social media that are different than before? Like, anything you can say about that, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be much more dialed in back before my publishing career, when I was drawing drag queens and stuff, that all went viral on social media. Like social media was my lifeblood. It's how my work was disseminated. And so I was really active and engaged with that. But things really turned when I started publishing books. And part of it is that when you're publishing kids' books, kids are not on social media in that way. And so you are, with my drag queen stuff, when I was like doing stuff for other queer people and other adults, like they're on social media and you're directly interacting with them. But if you're doing kids' books, those kids are not like leaving comments on your, Instagram posts typically. And so you're mostly talking to like parents and teachers and other authors. And I think that's useful. It's just, I found that I just didn't get nearly as much engagement. And I was so deeply involved in making the books. And once I started you spend like 2 years making your book, and you typically, may not want to share panels of, stories like in terms of like a year before it actually comes out for fear of spoilers, or just also like why would they care? So I just found that while I've been working on book length projects, I just don't have much to share. And I just, I've gotten really withdrawn. So when I have a book out, I'll try to plan a bunch of content to put out about that book. But yeah, I've struggled to figure out how to be online that much. And I do think one of the best aspects of social media is the sense of community with your own peers. So I think it's a great resource that Kids Comics Unite offers, because that is what I benefited from the most. Just seeing other artists vent, share life experience, share pay rates, share good news, share bad news, share their favorite new tool, or like new feature on Clip Studio that they make use of. That has just huge impact on you at any part of the process.
Awesome. Wow, Chad, this was such a great talk. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And I would love it if everybody could unmute yourself and say thank you, and we can say goodnight to each other.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank
Thank
you. This was
Chad.
great.
Thank
This
you.
was awesome.
Loved it.